For the first time in my life, I meaningfully and patiently listened to egalitarian scholars. And I couldn't believe how that I never even heard some of these angles. I'd been so taught that they were wrong, and that to listen to these guys was to head in the direction of feminism and liberalism. But when you actually listen to how scholarly these interpretations, scriptural passages were, and I read very carefully. I just read back and forth, everything I could get my hands on. And it dawned on me that probably the egalitarian scholars, although I certainly identified some flaws that I maybe still disagree with to this day, that they had a stronger case.
Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we true the verse of Genesis 3:16, and we discover that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way.
There were some leaders that had been around a lot longer who expressed in the leadership team real doubts about our doctrinal position, that complementarianism was right at all. And pointed out that we'd never done really good work on this. We just referred to Wayne Grudem's article on, Kefale, and we needed to write our own position paper. And I just handed over leadership of my congregation. I was freed up to bring more preaching and theological mindedness to the church. I was very excited to lean into the space. I knew that our position was correct, that soft complementarianism was the way to go. And I just needed to pull together all of the text in the right way and write this paper. And I had time in my hands, and I thought, well, I must hear from all the sides on this angle. And for the first time in my life, I meaningfully and patiently listened to egalitarian scholars. And I couldn't believe how that I never even heard some of these angles. I'd been so taught that they were wrong, and that to listen to these guys was to head in the direction of feminism and liberalism. But when you actually listen to how scholarly these interpretations, scriptural passages were, and I read very carefully. I just read back and forth, everything I could get my hands on. And it dawned on me that probably the egalitarian scholars, although I certainly identified some flaws that I maybe still disagree with to this day, that they had a stronger case on the teaching of the Bible. The complementarians had basically looked at the whole Bible through the small key lens of 1 Timothy 2 verse 12. I don't permit a woman to teach or to authentate a man, and one particular interpretation of that. And if you look at the Bible through those lenses, you bend every other scriptural passage to reinforce that idea. And when it dawned on me that if that interpretation was questioned, and if a compelling, alternate interpretations could be put forward, the case dissipates. I also discovered that really there was one key word in 1 Timothy 2 verse 12 upon which the whole case rested. It was the meaning of the word authentate. And I came across a PhD thesis by Jamie Hübner, who'd done really good work on the scholarship around the meaning of authentate at the time of Paul's writing it. And I realized there was a hapax legomenon, which means that it's just found once in the Bible. Not only that, a very rare word in antiquity, and probably it didn't mean exercise authority. Probably it meant something more like control or force or dominate. And when I realized that that translation, exercise authority, was probably wrong, the whole thing imploded. It's like the foundation was removed, and it just came crashing down. So I mentally got hold of the other most integral leaders in the church, and I said, guys, I need to admit that I've changed my mind. I think we've got it wrong. And at first they responded really well, because I was so theologically influential in the church. I was naive. I thought I could change all of our minds if I could just take people along the same pathway of inquiry I'd been on. Everybody would see it too. Come to think of it, I sound much like I did when I first became a Christian. Just show them what I've seen, and they'll have the same aha moment. And it turned out to be quite naive. Basically, if you change your mind on this, you have to restructure the entire church. And a church that's on its own, a truly independent church is more capable of making the change. But if you're part of a movement or a denomination where this is one of the pillars of that denomination, to change your mind on that particular verse and in this particular doctrinal point is to forfeit membership in a tribe. Most church leaders and churches draw a lot of energy and stability and safeness from knowing the tribe of churches that they're part of. And church leaders have worked hard to build relationships with a larger connection of churches. You're actually asking people to change their mind on this doctrinal point is to change their alliances, to forfeit connections that they've had for a very long time. At the same time, you've got a group of people. You'll have some people that are willing to really be open-minded, and other people will say, well, let me read up on this, and it'll go straight to the strident complementarian literature, which will repeatedly use the words, the Bible clearly says, beware the liberals, beware feminism, the Bible clearly says. Mm-hmm. And people don't like not knowing for sure, and the cognitive bias of the human mind is to latch onto certainty. So, for the church I was part of to change consisted of 10 congregations that were in close alliance. Sociologically, the chances of all 10 of those leaders changing their minds on this in a short period of time, I was asking for a sociological miracle. It turned out that there were some people that changed their mind, but I realized that it was implausible that everybody would change their mind. And so I realized I'd actually come to the end of my own tenure in this particular church. We'd always said that there were certain close-handed issues that if you were going to be a leader in this church, and one of those close-handed issues was complementarianism. Mm-hmm. So I ended up, moving away from that community. It felt really painful because I had no plans to move away from that community. Also, to be fair, I felt the process because I thought we were going to have a sincere conversation around it. Although we had a conversation, it seemed very one-sided and predetermined. So it put a lot of pressure on our relationships, and I felt unhappy with the process, and I vocalized my unhappiness.
we're doing more and more of the Eden podcast, and we're having people contacting us, and they're saying, I'm in a church like the one you were in.
Yes, yeah.
And they're not the pastor, they're just members of it, and it's the best church in town.
Yeah.
And they say, what do I do?
Yeah.
What do I do?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been doing here at Tru316 is that we started out, Joy, my wife, Dr. Joy Fleming, is a scholar in the Old Testament. And so she did her studies on Genesis 2 and 3. I'd like to talk about that in a minute. But and as a result of learning what she did, I said, that really has an impact on creation order that's supposed to be in 1 Timothy 2, and etc. Yeah. So we've gone ahead and gone into that in depth. Joy did her doctoral work on Genesis 2 and 3, and then I did mine on 1 Timothy 2 and 3. And that turned, I'm going to hold up my book. Ta-da! Yeah. It turned into a book called Back to Eden, 1 Timothy 2 and 3. Yeah. So even though I can recommend, I say, look at this book, or I can recommend your book. Here it is, ta-da, on my phone. It's called How God Sees Women, The End of Patriarchy. Yeah. Even though we have these resources, what's a person supposed to do when they're in a congregation and they don't even want to talk about it? They're afraid to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, if you are a leader in the church, then maybe you should be afraid to talk about it because you run the risk of being ousted. I mean, let's just be real. If you're an ordinary person in the church, you don't have much skin in the game. Church leaders don't expect everyone in their church to agree with them on secondary issues. We're happy to people to come in who've got different views on things, as long as you're not a vocal dissident. So I encourage our church members to make appointments with their pastors and just say, hey, I've had real doubts about this particular doctrinal aspect of our church. And I've done some reading. And I would really appreciate your feedback on what I've read. So you don't come in fighting, you come in curious, humble, And you say, would you be open to reading this book and helping me to make sense of it? Because it seems pretty compelling to me that there is another way of taking on these particular passages. And after all, I do think our church would be even stronger if we released women onto the leadership team and into the pulpit. I think a fairly strong case can be made that diversity is strength. And if you've got a leadership team and it's just men, well, maybe that leadership team could make better decisions if there's some women on that team. And when it comes to pastoring people, we all had enough experiences of men really blowing it and trying to pastor women. And then when it comes to preaching, we just keep hearing that, the typical masculine approach on scriptures. And when it's amazing when women open up scripture, they often see an angle that is in the text, but that somehow men tend to miss. And so you can make a case, and then say, and there are some, and it'll have a great evangelistic appeal for some non-Christians. At least this will be a deterrent to the gospel. They expose these communities that have just got male leaders. It just raises a needless obstacle in some people's minds. And then churches everywhere are losing people. Complementarian churches, some people saying, hey, I just can't do it anymore. I'm going to go find an egalitarian church. So complementarian pastors are often, if you come to them quite skillfully, will say, okay, let's lean into this. And I get emails from complementarian pastors all around the world that are busy changing their mind. There comes a moment in their own journey where they have enough doubts, and it might dawn upon them that perhaps have been stuck in an echo chamber on some interpretations of scripture. And if nothing else, sheer curiosity might make them open to reading more widely. And that is our hope, that more and more people will read more widely, understand alternate perspectives on doctrines that perhaps they're overly confident about, and especially respond to the arguments that probably any local church will be a more forceful, life-giving, arena in their city if there are men and women leading it and men and women behind the pulpit.
So
you said some really, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead, Joanne. We're both we got lots of stuff to ask. Go ahead, Joanne. You go first.
Well, you said something very intriguing, and that is that for the pastor and congregant alike, there is a sense of in-group. You didn't use those words, but that was the idea that I was getting. I'm part of a tribe. This is how we think. This is who we are. Then the longer you feel connected with this tribe, the more risky perhaps it feels to consider joining a tribe you're not very familiar with. It is what happens during the conversion experience. I was not a Christian before, and suddenly I am. Who are these people?
And
So
not only
I was
the fear of loss. It's not just the fear of the new tribe. It's the fear of losing the existing tribe. Carry on.
Because who they are is who I am. I am me because we are us. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your internal experience as you began wondering if perhaps this wasn't your tribe anymore and you were part of something else, or that you were going through this process of maybe I don't have it right after all. Internal though.
I was stubbornly holding on to the idea that this tribe was my tribe, and that we would stay in the conversation long enough to come to light on it. I had no other church or movement of churches that excited me. I felt like I was part of the best church in town. I suppose all good churches should make you feel that. Our church should be our favorite church. So I didn't have a escape hatch in my mind. Well, if this doesn't work, it's that. So it was a strange ending. It was a feeling of being washed onto an island and having to start again. And my own story is a story of God's surprising redemption, because I mentioned that this one particular church reached out to me. Well, I knew that they were egalitarian and men and women could lead, and they emphasized mutual submission in marriage. So it could work on those fronts. But the other aspects of the church in my mind didn't feel like they were a natural fit for me. And but somehow I ended up being part of this church and realized there were aspects of this church that I really liked. that were not my creation. The previous church I had helped to shape hugely. This particular church taught me some things, and in a sense have created a new chapter in my life of discovering new aspects of the Christian faith that I really like. And now I'm in a church that's got its own appeal. It's winning all kinds of people that maybe my previous church wasn't able to reach or hold. So I've got a lovely story of redemption. It was a crucifying experience, but fast forward, there was a resurrection coming.
Wow.
But all around, very powerful and moving. It wasn't simply a philosophical switch.
Yeah.
It was almost a life switch, it sounds like.
Yeah. And for me, to be honest, it was started off exegetical, and then it ended up being a life switch. It was I was just interested in what the Bible really taught on this particular point. You know, is the Bible inspired by God? We wouldn't build a doctrine on just one passage, and certainly not just one interpretation of one passage. What does the whole Bible say on it? And have we interpreted each passage correctly? How do you piece all of this together? I was absolutely drawn in by this exegetical and synthetical, the bringing together of all of these texts task. So that was my conversion, was intellectual. It was intellectual. And then as the penny dropped, I began to realize the implications. How different our church would be if it didn't believe this and we believe that. How different my marriage might be.
So Terran, in looking into what you've been doing in your ministry and what you've been teaching, I came across a wonderful video teaching thing that you did a while back on Priscilla and Aquila.
Oh, thank you.
So if they had founded a church in Cape Town, what would it look like? I think that was on your mind. I don't know if the church you're in now looks like Priscilla and Aquila's church. I hope it does. Could you bring out some of the high points of what you've discovered about Priscilla and Aquila and how that should influence our thinking?
Okay, if I can say a few things about Priscilla and Aquila.
Tru316 Foundation is the home of the Eden podcast. Join us for $3.16 a month or more. Let's true the verses on the key passages on women and men. Go to Tru316.com/partner. Tru316 is strengthening and encouraging many, and we're getting stories every day of lives changed through our ministry. We're the home of the Eden podcast, and we're getting the word out that God didn't curse Eve or Adam or limit woman in any way. Our volunteer help is wonderful, and we grow stronger with each new true partner who gives to the Tru316 Foundation so that we can cover the costs to do the technical work of the Eden podcast, to coordinate our True School workshops like the 2-week Eden workshop on Genesis 2 and 3, and to make the Tru316 Foundation function in its outreach to scholars and students around the world. You can give now with a one-time gift. And better still, you can join now and become a monthly donor. We call our monthly donors our true partners. Please join now by going to Tru316.com/partner.